Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions. Brian Trainor, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. I'm super excited for our time together. And like we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. So with your permission, we're going to start with where you were born, go all the way up to today. And then we want to talk about the amazing things that you're doing as a naturopathic doctor, right? Helping people to kind of, I mean, in some cases, you're putting lives back together, man. This is really, really cool stuff. So thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. This is an amazing opportunity for me to be here too. So super excited to get a little bit more of what we're doing down here on Coronado out to others, and to share some of the exciting things that are going on, that have gone on, and that continue to happen through this through our clinic Trinity, and through hopefully mine and my wife and our connections. Yeah, all that.
So you wanted to say something about a disclaimer regarding medical advice.
Yeah, usually just because I forget and then people ask me later. But I am a licensed naturopathic doctor in the state of California. I am a Institute for Medicine, functional medicine certified practitioner. I've been on a few boards, so just everything that I say is my own opinion, and it's not representing any organizations. But more importantly, none of this is medical advice. I'd love to work with patients or anyone that does need help along the way. I do, interact with people on social media and other things, but typically, the best, if I talk about any treatments or anything, those are best to discuss with your doctor. Give us a call, obviously share my contact info. Would love to help, but yeah, not if I share anything about fasting or peptides or hyperbaric or whatever the cool things that we're doing. It's not medical advice.
Right, gotcha. Okay, so now that we got that stuff out of the way, right? Where were you born?
Yeah, so I'm from upstate New York originally. Grew up in a great family. I got three sisters. Grew up, just south of Saratoga Springs, right near Albany, capital region up there. And from a young age, got to appreciate being healthy and all that. And I ended up going to West Point, the military academy. I know it's a little bit zoom forward, but in the early years, it was a lot of running, and it was really what I got into mainly after baseball, basketball, growing up playing sports, and got recruited to run cross country and track in college. And that's really what kind of led me in part to where I am now with some of the health challenges I faced through being an elite athlete and then an Army officer after that. So, yeah.
That's cool, man. So do you mind if we go back just a little bit?
Sure.
What was your favorite thing about growing up there?
Favorite thing about upstate New York, I mean, the fall, the autumn weather up there, it's incredible. And I really took it for granted, the seasons. Obviously, I am biased now. I like to go back and visit just long enough to remember why I live in California. But there's something about like the early crisp fall weather that I don't know if anywhere else in the country. The Lake George, I think one year just north of us, was rated the top lake in the country for just beauty, and so I appreciated that. And I also grew up in a great neighborhood where I could ride my bike, everywhere, and play with friends and stuff. So those things that after traveling, moving around with the military a bit, things I took for granted for sure. Just having that nice place to do all that, to grow up, was great.
That's cool, man. That's cool.
Growing little up, detail. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
It's okay. Go ahead.
I did grow up, my Irish grandparents moved in with us when I was, they moved back from Ireland. So 8 or 9, 7 or 8. So I grew up with extended family around too. And that was really special to have not just my parents, my sisters, but also my grandparents. Actually, the other set of grandparents also moved near us a few years after that. So really blessed to have all that in my life at a young age.
That's cool, man. So growing up, who was the most influential person to you?
Most influential person. Hmm. I should probably say my dad. No, I'm just kidding. My mom and my dad are, I always make jokes that I truly am. I know a lot of people, in terms of genetics, we are obviously a cross of our mom and dad, but I really, the more I lean into it, I'm such a perfect mix of my mom and dad. Just the God really blessed me with the best of both of them from what I can tell. And my mom's got the most energy in the world. She's in her mid 60s, still doing CrossFit every day and Spartan races. And my dad is just such a thoughtful, loving, like he really, if you share something with him, he doesn't always react right away, but the next day he's come up with the pros and cons and the yes and no's and really deeply thought about whatever he's going to say. And so I'm a little bit more like my mom and my communication style, but I'm really grateful. My dad was a rock through it all. Yeah, long story. My mom did get diagnosed with breast cancer when I was young. She was in her 30s,
Wow.
and she battled that and overcame. And like I said, she's still winning races and doing all kinds of stuff. She's my hero in many ways. So influential in seeing her in that season of life, but then also my dad through all the seasons,
Yeah.
be a rock for me to kind of look up to and to I know that's an easy answer, my mom, my dad, but I know not everyone gets that opportunity. In fact, I'm meeting this evening with two guys from the military that I'm close with that both have lost their dads at young ages, and it's not necessarily my role in their life, but it's a reminder of how grateful I am for Jim and Eileen Trainor back in upstate New York.
No, that's cool, man. That's awesome. So, so in high school, it sounds like you had a favorite sport. Was it cross country running?
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily my favorite at first. My one of my good friends, Mike Danaher, still up in some part of southern Maine, Nashua, New Hampshire. He talked me into running. I was a basketball player in freshman year and doing pretty well. But I actually transferred from a private Christian school to back to my public school in order to run. So that was a big changing point from 10th to 11th grade. But he convinced me to run instead of play on the golf team, which sounds silly, but the golf team, I got to go play golf for free after school and I was decent at it. He's like, hey, you should come get in shape for basketball. And my friend Mike was a much better runner. He ran like a 4:30 mile as a freshman. So my goal is just to keep Mike in sight on all my training runs and it was a turning point. I did end up beating him in a few races during high school. We both ended up running in college, but he was definitely a better runner, but more talented for sure and harder worker. But he got me going, and we actually both made that transition back to our local public school. We're from the same hometown, but we both had gone to this private school. Grateful to my parents for that experience. But going back, our public school was one of the top teams in the country, actually, in upstate New York, one of the best cross country areas of the country, and we ended up coming in sixth at nationals our senior year out in Oregon. So we got to do some cool things running. Got to get much faster than I am now in my 30s. But yeah, that kind of it did shape a lot of my life. I think running, the big thing that it represented for me at the time was somewhat control. The more effort I put in, the harder I worked. There wasn't an umpire calling
Mhm.
balls and strikes. I realized that just shortly before that, I could throw a perfect pitch or, make a perfect play and else could drop the ball. It could be called
Mhm.
the ball. So something about that in that formative time of my early teens, mid-teens, that I could control it, which I've
Mhm.
learned later is not the most important thing. But that's what drew me to running, that if I ran this much or trained this hard, this was somewhat predictable of an event. And I got better and better and better. So there's a lot of improvement that was measurable. And
Mhm.
so I still value those things, but I think I grew to overvalue them. I got a little obsessed with it for a little while.
It's all right. Obsession's a good thing in moderation, right?
Absolutely.
So in high school, did you have a favorite subject?
Good question. So I remember it's odd because now as a naturopathic doctor, I do view what I'm trying to do oftentimes is combine the art and the science of the human performance and anatomy and optimization. There is an art in there, and I think we'll get to that point.
Mhm.
I never really loved biology. I enjoyed it. I actually really liked physics. So I ended up
Hmm.
in college doing kinesiology and so more like exercise physiology and physics of the body. And
Mhm.
I've come to really appreciate the homeodynamics of the body. So there is like a biophysics that we don't talk about as much as biochemistry, because that's
Mhm.
we're trying to shift chemistry in the body. But because of that, I've come to appreciate a lot of the and starting in that age, I think the math and physics. I remember AP physics, like a college physics class, that really propelled me to want to study that more in the body. I always thought I'd be an engineer, even though my job now is pretty away from engineering. It's similar to like what we call systems engineering, that idea of
Okay.
like, if I, as a naturopathic doctor, I'm actually zoomed out enough to see how each of the systems of the body, not so specialized, I'm only working on that one widget. We're zoomed out. So in high school, I think it was math and physics. There was one great teacher in 11th grade, Mr. Clements. I think he passed away recently, but him and he really inspired me to actually learn math, not just learn it for the test. So,
Gotcha. So you graduate from high school and you end up going to West Point.
mhm.
Talk about that decision, like the mindset. What made you decide to do that?
Great question. So West Point was 2.5 hours south of us, so it wasn't too far away. I'd gone to, I think, a Army baseball game and a few things growing up. So definitely had an appreciation for it. But up until about 11th grade, I had really no interest. I thought, I wanted to go further away from home, possibly. I wanted to but the big things that kept coming back to, I did grow up, like I said, in New York, close to the time of 9/11. I was in fifth grade, and that did certainly impact some of our family. Not no one directly like not in the towers or anything, but that certainly shaped me at a young age to know I wanted to serve in some way. I did think it was going to be ROTC, running track and doing ROTC somewhere else. But then I did go through the recruiting process. I got recruited by a number of other great schools. The second school was Dartmouth. That really, I was about to. It was really between those two. And I
Mhm.
got to Yale and a few other, great schools. But they all were kind of showing me how the hardest part was getting in as an athlete. If you can get into the school, it's going to be easy after that. And for whatever reason, West Point, unfortunately, they did everything else. They said it's going to be the hardest thing. Like you shouldn't come here. And on our recruiting trip specifically, fortunately, that was what, 2008, fall of 2008, spring of 2009. There's three suicides at West Point. I think they might have been, I can't remember if they were attempts or unfortunately. And that was like, there was one like the week before I got there to visit. And I'd gone through all these other colleges, taking me to parties, doing all these things. And I didn't, I was young and impressionable. I thought they were good, but walked away from the visit at West Point. One, we did beat Navy in track that weekend. That helped that I was visiting, but
Mhm.
everything else was cold, miserable, gray. Everyone's saying, don't come here. And I think at that point in my life, the mindset was really like, what's the thing that I can actually devote it, like that's challenging. I wanted to
Yeah.
be challenged. And I think that that's what it represented. And I think God could have used any of the paths there, but I also did ask a pastor. I was pretty new to like faith at that time, but I did ask him, how do I know God's will for my life? And I definitely didn't have it answered, but I think I chose the one that was presented the biggest challenge.
Gotcha. Okay. That might have been his will,
Yeah.
right?
Amen.
Because it's not always the easy route that's God's will. We
Yeah,
learn more from
exactly.
being challenged, right?
I definitely believe that. I think, he definitely works all things for good, and I see how that decision has shaped who I am today. Like and I'll share more about how I'm in San Diego, which definitely doesn't have an army base, but and I learned God does love the Navy also. Learned that over time. Didn't believe it at first, but friendly rivalry. I was with a friend from the Naval Academy last night, even two of them. And it's a good reminder that why I'm here is in part because I was military, even though it was for a short time. So
So go Army, beat Navy, right?
that's it wasn't a great year this year, but we've had some better years. When I was there, we lost every single year in football and every year in track and cross country. Also, we did beat them in triathlon when I started racing triathlon, so I got a few things to talk about. But other than that, it was a rough 4 years of that rivalry.
Yeah. Well, hey, Army's getting better, man. Every year they seem to just get better and better. It's awesome. Even with NIL and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
in at West Point, did you have a favorite subject?
Hmm. So, yeah, I ended up starting out to be a systems engineer. And for those that don't know, the West Point does, you still choose a major now. Back in the 80s and 90s, I guess you didn't, but they did switch that. It is a little more modern now. But you take a lot of core classes, like a lot of an extra history, extra math and physics and chemistry. And I'm really grateful. I got exposed to a lot more than I would have, because I always wanted to in high school. I think the desire to be really good at running made me kind of obsessed with like being great at one thing. And I do
Mhm.
believe the way that more I've introspected and just seen over time, I think God has made me to be pretty good at a lot of things. And
Mhm.
that's honestly like the definition of an officer should be able to do the job that his enlisted soldiers is doing, but also be able to do other things. So I think he's gifted me in that way. And that's why I'm now more of a primary care doctor, which is interesting because our field, most people do specialize. They get really into men's health or endocrinology or some specialty. And actually most doctors really aim for really specialized treatments. He's wired me to be a little different, so I do believe. And so at West Point, the ones that really I remember that really shaped me was performance psychology. So I did get a minor in both systems engineering and psychology, while also focusing on kinesiology, which was exercise performance and physiology. But honestly, those classes were my hardest ones. I got my worst grades, which makes hopefully don't tell me my patients that I didn't learn anatomy that time around. But it
Mhm.
we didn't one big thing was at West Point, because it's only undergraduate, a lot of the big exercise performance psychology, performance kinesiology programs are University of Texas, Penn State, these big schools that have PhD, masters, research going on. So
Right.
we tried to fit, it was somewhat of a square peg into a round hole with kinesiology. because we were asked to do all this research and we would have to like bribe our fellow undergrads that weren't getting paid anything, or there's no budget to do like treadmill tests and finger
Mhm.
prick lactate threshold, different stuff. So, which was really cool stuff. But when you're already taking 25 credits, very few other cadets wanted to participate. So, there was one class called the Psychology of Elite Performance that I had a psychologist that was incredible. They taught me a lot about for myself. At the time, it was mostly for my own racing and mindset, but I
Mhm.
think it carried over in the way that I attempt to treat patients with we call it motivational interviewing. But I do think that's part of almost every interaction I have now with people and with patients. So I'm grateful for that.
That's cool, man. So, pardon me. So you leave West Point, you're active duty in the Army.
Mm.
Pardon me. What did they assign you to do? And how long were you in the Army?
Yeah, good question. So I graduated May 25th because my birthday is 24th. I had to remember which one was which. May 25th, 2013. So over 10 years ago now. And 2 days later, I got hit by a car and fractured my right femur. So
Wow.
cycling, I had this big goal. Instead of doing what travel in Europe or whatever people do on their post graduation leave before they go to wherever they're being assigned, I decided to ride my bike from New York to Florida. I had this whole route planned out. I had done a similar 6-day ride from Eastern New York out to Niagara Falls and back. So I knew I
Mhm.
could do it. That was 6 days, but I was going to do it for 20 something days and raise awareness for Team Red, White, and Blue, which is a nonprofit that some of my professors founded. And but honestly, looking back, it was a pretty like, I don't know, it was just a thing that I wanted to do versus I was gonna miss my sister's graduation. I was gonna from high school. Just I don't know. I see the value now. 2 days after, instead of going on that trip, I laid on the couch at home with a broken femur and healing. So
Wow.
that changed my path a little bit. What should have happened is it was this weird limbo where I was out of West Point, but I wasn't yet at Fort Leonard Wood, which is where the Army engineer officer basic training is. So I was supposed to go out to Bullock there, and I still did, but I got delayed. Well, I ended up still going there in July. So a month and a half later, I was out there, but I was on crutches, and they weren't very happy with me. So I didn't brand new to the Army. They just teach you all the things that more the high level leadership stuff at West Point. The little practical things. You're never supposed to PCS or permanent change of station in the Army when you're broken, when you're on profile, when you're injured or sick. I didn't know that. I showed up because West Point already let me go, and I was on this weird graduation leave time frame. So I showed up, and I chose engineering not because I necessarily wanted to build things. We mostly were blowing things up at that time. It was mostly route clearance. And so the engineer corps in the Army definitely took a hit. By the time I got to my unit later in Fort Lewis, Washington, it's some changes, but I chose it because, little known fact, the Army has a few deep sea engineer divers. So there's about 90, I think, 90 to 100 in the whole Army. There's a combat dive school that many special forces Green Berets go through, but the actual engineer dive field, there's a few officers selected each year. So I was going because, again, it represented the biggest challenge I thought I could take on. Out of West Point, we're not able to go straight into special forces or the Ranger Battalion. You kind of have to prove yourself for the first 2 to 4 years before you can put into it for those. But
Right.
little known fact, the engineers, you can go straight to officer basic, get selected from there, and go down to dive school in Panama City Beach and go through with Navy, EOD, Navy divers, and all that. So that was what a Navy, Air Force PJs. So we all go to the same dive school in Panama City. I did not get to go because of the injury in part. I did get selected, which was interesting. About 3 months after the injury, I did the tryout. It was like a day of physical tests, and still in good shape. I just didn't have a working leg for a while. In that time, I got diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, and so that is really what changed my life. And I do, looking back, the what ifs, what caused it. I started having bloody bowel movements, is how it started with. So, and that radically started changing my life. I realized later, I ended up getting medically discharged about 3 years from that date. But during Officer Basic, it started. I went out to a civilian hospital because it was a government shutdown in 2013. I don't know if you remember that time frame, but I thought it was a blessing because it kind of got hid from the Army. I didn't want to show my weakness stuff, but I got diagnosed with a colonoscopy. It showed I had pretty severe ulcerative colitis, and that's looking back, it was probably the stress of me worrying about my career and having a broken leg and trying to get back to training way too soon, sooner than I was supposed to, really. And so that started my Army career out, and that was in Missouri, kind of a holding place. I wanted to go down to Florida to do dive school. I ended up going to Washington, about as far away as I could possibly be. And that I'm grateful. I still finished Officer Basic. I didn't get to go. So I was still allowed to be in the Army at that point, but I couldn't pass the dive physical, similar to like a Ranger physical, or I don't know what the Marines have for that. But the dive medical officer basically said, yeah, we can't let you go to dive school, even though you qualify, even though you made the cut through all the tryouts. You could get worse. It could be a liability. Dive. Learned later, hyperbaric oxygen diving might have been really good for my gut, but that's not the point. So that's kind of how my Army career started. Not exactly how I planned graduating, and the cool thing is the only two places engineer divers can be stationed really as home base is Virginia, fairly close to family, Virginia Beach area, or Hawaii. So I was like, well, those are two pretty good choices
No kidding.
for the beginning of my career. And you get to work with a smaller team. And that's what attracted me to the engineer branch in general. We kind of joked that it was infantry with a skill, at least even if I ended up in the bigger engineer corps. Not true. Obviously, there's great individuals in every branch of the Army, but and military for that matter. But that is what I experienced when I got to Fort Lewis. I did get to be a platoon leader up in Washington, just south of Tacoma, and I'm really grateful for that time up there. I didn't deploy to Iraq or Afghanistan. We were right when I got there, we had just shifted to PACOM out there. Most of the unit that I joined had just gotten back from Afghanistan, and there was a new, focus on getting ready for Russia invading Crimea and North Korea. And so it was kind of a blessing because my soldiers had so much more experience in really every aspect of combat, but no one had fought the Russians at all. So we all had to go back and read books and learn together. So as a new platoon leader, I still had to, figure out how to best lead people that were older, wiser, more seasoned than I was. But we had to go out to the desert and learn how to run those tactics and do those things together. So I am grateful for that because that leadership experience, even though it wasn't in combat, I think has carried over to help me today.
Yeah, sounds like it. So how long were you in?
So I ended up staying in till 2016. So I got out Right about just over 3 years. The medical stuff continued to add up. I ended up going through about 9 hospitalizations
Oh,
so the first year with this gut condition, I didn't realize how bad it was. It got to the point where I was having up to 30 bloody bowel movements a day. But I'm a
wow.
big optimist, so I never kept track. And I was like, oh, that was a few, that was a pretty bad day. But when it got to the point where I couldn't hide it, so crazy, but in the military, sometimes people have bathroom accidents and have to, have different issues. But so I kept kind of like kicking the can down the road, like, oh, it's not a big deal. I just have to run to the bathroom again. And I remember there was a time where I was briefing our battalion commander. This would have been 2014 at this point, on some range that we were going out to do. And like I had a bathroom accident in front of my commanders and stuff. And this I don't know how many people even knew, but I basically had to finish the presentation and go. And so that really, as a young man, like starting to not be able to control the things that I know I could control, including my ability to do the basic things that we learn as a baby eventually. Yeah, it really changed my life. And we talked a little bit before the call, but I did have a point in that time frame of the first year or so of the diagnosis that I wasn't really sure what my life was about, why I was here on this earth, if I couldn't do the physical things that I had kind of based most of my life to that point on, was my physical ability, winning races. We didn't talk too much about that, but it was a big part of my life. And I was even at that time with that diagnosis and everything, I was still on the All-Army triathlon team. I was selected for the Fort Lewis 10-miler team. So I was still trying to go out and race with this amount of gut condition. I was about 20 to 30 pounds lighter than I am now, and I'm 140 pounds, maybe 50 on a good day, soaking wet now. And so I was a pretty small runner, and yeah, so I was in for about 3 years, but most of that kind of got taken up by my in and out of the hospital. I got to be a platoon leader for a little while. Really grateful for a company commander that saw that in me. He knew it. I told him up front, even when I was still hiding it from the Army, and I'll kind of explain that's not a good idea.
Yeah.
BA later and different things, but he's really supportive. And then my next battalion commander was also amazing. He let me in my final year or so out there, a little less than a year, but I was going through a medical board. Ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease are both medically disqualifying. So I was trying to fight to stay in. I actually tried to find a loophole where, hey, you already invested all this money in me at West Point. Could I?
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.